The landscapes of our lives are for learning, where experience is our teacher. When we gather together to share our resources, we are destined to love and thrive. Good morning, Pierre.
Good morning, Maureen. How are you this morning?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. I'm very good. I drove through the fog to get here. It's what they call June gloom. There's foggy mornings in June and July, and then it burns off.
July.
Yeah, I know. I know. Well, there's a word for it in July. July something. Anyway, I'm here. I'm good. What are we talking about this morning?
Today we're going to talk about Jon Kabat-Zinn in one of his really good books. He's got a few. Called Full Catastrophe Living, using the wisdom of your body and mind to face stress, pain, and illness.
Full Catastrophe Living is the title of his book. That's like the title of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole introduction, he talks about his editor not wanting catastrophe to be in the title, but he talks about how it's like perfect.
It is perfect.
I think it's perfect too, yeah.
It is perfect. I totally identified with it immediately. I mean, this guy, what, does he know me?
He knows humans.
So yeah. So let me tee him up a little bit for listeners and our resource podcast, and then you can tell me a bit about the book. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, first of all, if you're looking this guy up, he spells his name differently. So Jon is Jon. Okay. Kabat is Kabat. So not Cabot like Boston, and he's from the Boston area, Cabot. And dash Zinn, and it's Zinn, not like Zinn out here, Zinfandel in California. So it's Jon Kabat-Zinn. And he was born in 1944. He's a professor of medicine. He graduated from Haverford, which is a small school out in Pennsylvania, went on to earn a Ph.D. in molecular biology and graduating in 1971 from MIT. So there's the Boston connection. And he, it was around the time of anti-war, and he was introduced to meditation from a Zen missionary who came to speak at MIT, and that started to change his life as he started to get into mindfulness techniques. And he's a behavioral cognitive kind of therapist, I guess you would say. And a popular guy in the early kind of work around mind, body, spirit. So
he's an MD, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
He's not a psychotherapist.
Oh no, okay, right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I didn't think so. I thought he was a medical doctor. Yeah.
It says he has a PhD in molecular biology.
Oh, yeah. Well, whatever.
I'm not sure about the MD part of it.
Okay. I guess I'm associating maybe the medical degree with his stress reduction clinic at the UMass Medical Center. So I kind of, maybe I just assumed he was an MD, but perhaps he isn't.
He's a professor of medicine at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Okay. Whether he's an MD or not, it doesn't really, kind of bring that out.
Yeah.
But definitely his work around UMass Medical School.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and and that's out in Western Mass, and I know like the Insight Meditation Center, like Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein, and they all started that like I think in the 60s and 70s. So I think he has a pretty close connection with those people in the Buddhist sort of camp. And Thich Nhat Hanh wrote the introduction to this book, so I'm assuming he's well known in that group of people.
Yeah, I mean, he's won amazing awards, Mind and Brain Prize for the Center of Cognitive Study,
Mhm.
um, awarded to him from, a university in Italy. Um, just very much in the forefront
Mhm.
of this work in mind, body, spirit. So tell me about a full catastrophe living, and you can tell me, and I can learn something about myself.
Yeah, I haven't read this book. I think it came out originally in 2013 or 2014, and I think I had read Wherever You Go,
There you
There
are.
You Are,
Right.
which was a shorter book, and I used parts of that because he referenced Henry David Thoreau quite a bit in that. And I used portions of that when I was teaching my unit as an English teacher on transcendentalism, when I was teaching about Thoreau and Emerson, and they had a connection to Eastern thought or whatever. So I remember starting with him there, and then I read Full Catastrophe Living more for myself, because, you know,
Mm-hmm.
figure out my own life and state of being and so forth. And I really thought it was not only mindfulness, which I thought was like just meditation practice,
Yeah.
it brought it into the domain of the body, because this MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, also involves the body and treating people who are in pain. And that's how we started that program. So this for me, when I read this, it brought together the meditation mindfulness, like sitting meditation, with then like yoga and body scanning and progressive muscle relaxation. It brought kind of the embodied piece to my attention.
Right.
Yeah.
I think from our work and discussions around this mind, body, spirit nexus that we've been exploring on the podcast, um, you can kind of see how it's sort of like water flowing. You can sort of see how, this guy starts out and the water starts to flow. Okay, I've got this mindfulness based stress reduction clinic, MBSR, as you said. And then, like you said, it ends up not being all about the mind. It ends up being about the body because that's where the stress is held.
Right. So quickly, just for people, we mentioned the mindfulness-based stress reduction program and the clinic, which he started decades ago. It says right here in the book, the clinic was set up to serve as a kind of safety net in the hospital to catch people who were falling through the cracks and challenge them to do something for themselves as a complement to whatever their doctors and their healthcare team were doing for them. He,
Right.
he said now those cracks are more like chasms for a powerful indictment. Okay, never mind. So meaning that the medical model and the disease model, doctors treating disease, um, just wasn't quite cutting it for a lot of people, especially those
Right.
with chronic pain and like fibromyalgia and a lot of, psychosomatic kind of things,
Right.
or just learning how to live with pain as a result of some physical injury or whatever. So
Right.
he said it obviously expanded, beyond that. Anyway, so he made this 8-week program, and it's like an educational, you know, practical hands-on program. And he does explain what that is in the book, but we're probably not going to go into detail about that.
Yeah. No, I think that's great, Maureen. I did find out that he's not a medical doctor. He's a PhD and he's a professor of medicine at UMass, and he started this clinic.
Mhm.
And the clinic has touched a lot of people. I mean, when you're
Yeah.
back east, it's more well known and it's affected people, not just in terms of therapy and help for them. There's that, but it really transformed the way a lot of people that are practicing in this space expanded their thinking.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, he's a kind of a go-to guy. He's got a lot of videos on YouTube too, just as far as resources go for people. You can look him up, and he does various talks and meditations and so forth. So that's good to know.
Cool. Cool.
I'll just read,
I,
I'll read a little bit from the introduction to the second edition to give
yeah,
you
sure.
an idea of.
Yeah.
So
I,
I
I
associate.
like that. I like that when we put a little like drop up what the person actually says. Yeah. What does he
Yeah,
say?
it's a big book, but um,
It's a big book.
it's kind of just to talk about like what mindfulness is, what we mean by that. Um, he writes, over the course of my own meditation practice and of doing the work I do in the world, I have come to see the cultivation of mindfulness as a radical act of sanity, of self-compassion, and ultimately of love. As you will see, it involves a willingness to drop in on yourself, to live more in the present moment, to stop at times and simply italicized be, rather than
Mhm.
getting caught up in endless doing while forgetting who is doing all the doing and why. It has to do with not, quote, mistaking our thoughts for the truth of things, and not being so susceptible to getting caught in emotional storms that so often only compound pain and suffering, our own and that of others. This approach to life is indeed a radical act of love on every level.
Thank you, Maureen, for reading that. This phrase, it's a radical act of love and it's a radical practice, is so interesting and so powerful. And I don't know, I'm glad you read it. I'm glad you wrote that. I don't know that people outside of meditation, can grasp that immediately. The fact that you're not doing anything, you're just sitting there.
Seems to make no sense to most people.
Makes no sense. And how can this possibly be a radical act? It is the most passive thing that you could possibly be doing. And yet the transformative power of how you perceive the world. Part of what you read there is,
Being instead of doing.
right, is brought up by Sam Harris. And the you know understanding that our thoughts are not who we are. Our thoughts are really not the world around us. Our thoughts are our thoughts.
There
And
are
once,
interpretations. They're what we think of what's happening.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Narrow,
And
limited.
many, many things. But one of the things that Sam Harris puts in very sharp relief and repeats, if, which is good to make the point, thoughts, they come and they go.
Mm-hmm.
And you basically have no control over them. I mean, you just don't. They just come. And then the nice part about it is they go. And when
Well,
you
if you let them.
if you let them, they can't remain very long, even if you try, even if it's there. I mean, they repeat. Yes, they can hound you. They can cause, no, they can cause suicide. They can cause lots and lots of damage, but they come and go, and they're not you. And this separation from thoughts and connection to the world in a different modality is
Or
a
just
radical act of
or
love.
a connection to your own being, with
Right.
thoughts just being one small part of
Right.
your being. And oh, by the way, you're a body, and so he says, it talks about, emotional storms, too. So there's the thoughts, and then there's the emotions and sensations that are also happening within our experience that
Right.
we can get wrapped up in and think we are, and keep fueling the fire,
Right.
with the thoughts and the emotions
Yeah.
together, and then over identify with them. But it's kind of one of those things,
That's a
like,
good word, over identify.
you don't know you're doing it until you know you're doing it.
Until you start to observe yourself. And you said your connection to your being, and at the sort of height or apex of the practice, your being is is this connection to the world. I mean, it all flows. There's not much of a
Well,
difference.
yeah, it's realization, really, because you are being, you just unconscious of it. But this mindfulness is more intentional, it's building conscious awareness of your experiences without judgment. And I guess, Jon Kabat-Zinn really, I in my opinion, or in my experience,
Sure.
seems to have been the one who really defined mindfulness in a definition that's useful. It's paying attention on purpose with not paying attention on purpose non-judgmentally. And I know
Right.
that comes from him. I mean,
Right.
it's not how,
Right.
of course, people have defined it, but I like Kabat-Zinn's definition, paying attention on purpose non-judgmentally. And I think the non-judgmentally part is what you're referring to with the thinking of the judging and calling your experience something as good or bad or anything. Like, it's the labeling, it's the interpreting, it's the stories that we make of our experience. But if
Right.
you can create that pause through meditation, right, you can separate or distance yourself or healthily dissociate from that almost automatic process of experience happens, it means this. We're always
Yeah.
making meaning, right? And it's just
Yeah.
sort of like hold, like just be with the experience. Don't put any sort of value to it or
Yeah.
judgment. And that's a radical act. That is a
I was
radical
just going to
act.
say that is a radical act, and I appreciate you bringing the definition to the forefront and him, um, and maybe we can wrap up on that note and just let our listeners explore this guy who was there, kind of, which is so popular today. He kind of set the bar.
Yeah. Kind of want to read a little bit more.
Oh, you do?
I'm
Okay.
not I'm not ready to wrap up.
Okay.
So he says, um, even though the meditation practice is really about being rather than doing, it can seem as if it is a major undertaking, and it is. After all, we have to make the time to practice, and that does take some doing and requires intentionality and discipline, as we shall see. We sometimes put it this way to prospective participants before we admit them to the MBSR program. And I like this because it reeks of kind of his attitude, and I can hear his voice. He's kind of funny. He says, you don't have to like the daily meditation practice schedule. You just have to do it.
That
Then,
sounds familiar, doesn't it?
then at the end of the 8 weeks, you can tell us whether it was a waste of time or not. But in the interim, even if your mind is telling you constantly that it is
Mm-hmm.
stupid or a waste of time, practice anyway, as wholeheartedly as possible, as if your life depended on it, because it does in more ways than you think.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't that wrap up kind of what we were just saying? Like,
Yeah,
the
it
mind
does.
is gonna
It does. It does. And
interfere.
it's wonderful. It's what we were taught in yoga. It's how I teach yoga. If your mind's telling you it's stupid, just recognize that and do it anyway. And
Mhm.
then look back and see where you've been. It's like many, many little steps, these soft edged processes. All right. Well, thank you, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and thank you, Maureen, for bringing him to the fore and having the resource there to read from the book. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, it's really good. Just think, I mean, most people need to understand stress and stress reduction. So it's so applicable to all of us.
Yeah.
Even if you're
The
not into
major
meditation.
thing, yeah, the major one of the major statements today for me, because we've been podcasting and it started with you reading everything, was your statement was, oh, I haven't read this book. But anyway, I think that's great. I'm going to have to read it because obviously the story of my
I thought
life.
you read it. You didn't read this book?
No,
Oh, wow.
no,
I think
no,
you really
no.
appreciate it.
It's the story of my life. I wrote the book, for Pete's sakes. Full Catastrophe Living. Okie dokie. I'll see you around the corner for another one related to this, right?
Yeah,
Maybe?
yeah, we'll talk about kind of, I think just as I will wrap here. The reason why we're gonna do another podcast on another person about nervous system regulation is because a lot of times when people try to meditate or they try to learn to slow down and meditate and become more mindful and apply this mindfulness stuff, they struggle because they're dysregulated in some way they don't know. And so a lot of times people say, well, I thought mindfulness practice is supposed to help me calm down, and you know what I mean? And it does for a lot of people, but for some people who have traumatic stress and don't know it, it can be really, really difficult and disappointing and problematic. So there
All
is that
right. Well, let's get
caveat.
to that.
Yeah.
Let's get to that
All
second
right.
chapter.
So I'm Maureen from Landscapes for Learning. Learn to live and live to learn.
Nice, nice. And I'm Pierre from Yoga Heals Everywhere. Peace through grace, friends. Peace, peace through grace.